The Lich itself is it's an undead sorcerer, a wizard, basically a humanoid entity. In the case of, if there's only humans, it's a human that has attained so much power that it has used that power to create an immortal state for itself. It has basically conquered death through magic. Okay, it has become really that space of. I don't know, Ray Kurzweil or something, right? Those or Robert Bigelow. Those guys that are always trying to defeat death. Those guys who are always trying to take us somewhere, well, where we've never been, to the old Philosopher's Stone, immortality, the Fountain of Youth, all those things, right? It seems to be a quest to me that is it's eternal. It's one of those things that we seem to be chasing as long as humans have thought of life and death. Clearly, one of the most magical things we could conceive of would be to conquer death itself and live on. And in the case of a lich, it's not a good thing. They are, evil entities. They use, foul, corrupted magic, sort of the dark side of magic, to do this because, of course, this is not a natural state, this level of immortality. And so it brought to mind, again, so you guys know me, the Dungeons and Dragons in me, I just can't help myself sometimes. But this also fits into the undead, of course, which is just a reanimated corpse in some capacity, right? Bringing back the dead, which the Lich are said to be able to do once they get to that level of magic and they can, keep themselves alive in eternity. Then they can certainly bring entities back from the dead, right? Okay. But the weird part about this is that I've talked about this briefly in the past on this show, but the really interesting, bizarre thing about a Lich is that it keeps its eternal visage, which is a skeleton, by the way. You end up still kind of crumbling and turning into this monster anyway, of the undead sorcerer. You don't get to keep your ravishing good human looks. You end up looking like a zombie. Okay. It just gets bad. It gets really bad. However, what they end up doing as part of this longer process or this huge ritual to kind of keep their immortal soul here on Earth is they have to bind their soul to an object, to something known as a phylactery. And it is, in this particular case with Dungeons & Dragons, it's something like sometimes a trinket. It could be a lot of different things. It could be a box. It could be, something. And of course, they hide this because if you find it, they are vulnerable because now you sort of have access to their bound soul in a particular object. Again, a coin, a candle, candelabra, whatever it is, right? There's going to be different phylacteries. But the term is basically used to house these souls. Okay. And I got to thinking, and I was, as usual, just kind of peeling through Twitter, X, and all the rest of the weirdness. And this guy's back in the news. What's his name? Ray Kurzweil. It's going to go faster and faster. And we're going to actually deal with accidents and actually be able to back up our brain and back up our heart. And it's going to be very hard to imagine how you could die. This is Ray Kurzweil saying this. And people don't really want to die. Yeah, no kidding. You ask people, he says, do you want to live to 120 years old? And people are negative and about that idea, of course, because they think of people that they've met. And they haven't actually met anybody who's 120, but they've met 95, 100-year-olds. And they don't want to be like that because, he's saying we won't be like that. It'll be something else. It'll be some level of technology that's, not going to lock us into that really, dementia-laden, really horrific endgame state of what humanity has become. So sorry about that. I thought I had this all fixed up to where you could hear the stream, so I could just play YouTube clips and stuff directly, but apparently there's more audio work to do. Sorry about that. But basically the idea is this, and the question for you guys tonight is, I think that there's something to this, meaning that from the days of yore, this has been a quest pretty much forever. Pretty much the Fountain of Youth, this whole Philosopher's Stone, immortality in and of itself. But recognize in the old days, like we'll get to some of the Egyptian priests and the mummification and into some of these things, but also it was always like the priest class trying to preserve this humanity, this soul, this ability to live forever, or at least be resurrected in some capacity, which was for the mummification process. But do you think that the consciousness itself is sort of pre-wired to go after this immortality state, to maybe grant an immortality to singular consciousness, to kind of create a larger immortal consciousness. I don't know, just an idea that kind of came into my head as I was talking about this. But we're going to talk about the Dybbuk box tonight. We're going to talk about these the fusing of souls and this type of thing with not just machines, of course, in this context, but other things like a rocking chair or a candelabra or a phylactery, except in the modern sense that could be a homunculus of sorts or a golem. A lot of ways to look at this and consider, because the world's changing quickly. And do you think any of this is even possible? That really becomes the question. Is it possible to extend life eternally through some consciousness transference of not just, let's say, a digital space, but the space of, well, the magic phylactery? And yeah, there you go. We start with liches. We'll get digital. We'll get weird because, of course, it's 1 week to Halloween, so let's do it. I mentioned the Dybbuk box, and we did recently. If you guys have been following the podcast feed, thank you to those of you who have recently said that you are enjoying this short podcast. I'm putting up about 30-minute podcasts to fill the space between the days that I'm taking off here. And again, thank you for understanding that. I've been able to slow down a little bit and not just be up to my neck constantly, which has been incredibly nice. But we did do a short form podcast on the Dybbuk box, maybe a few weeks back, a couple 3 weeks or so, something like that. But the Dybbuk box really fits into this larger context of a phylactery, or this idea of binding your soul to an object or a machine. Okay, because of course the weird part is the machine aspect of this, all right, which is where we're headed. And so one might argue in today's realm, in today's world, somebody like Ray Kurzweil, or somebody like Bill Gates or Bob Bigelow, or these dare I say, weirdos that are doing everything they can to try and stay alive as long as possible because they think they're going to be able to transfer their soul, their consciousness. You just define these words however you want to define these words, and be able to live forever. And is it a human quest? Is this really what maybe consciousness wants out of us? And it might be the pinnacle of everything if you can defeat death and conquer it that way. I don't know. It is, of course, one of those philosophical things that makes me go, that seems awfully suspicious. It almost seems like a trap. Carol Ann, stay away from the light, right? It kind of feels like that, of course, from Poltergeist back in the day. But look, I don't know. Of course, the answer is complicated, and it is a philosophical question. And of course, it always goes back to, would you like to live forever yourself? And I know that, when you think about it, it is daunting. It is scary. It is one of those, like, as Ray Kurzweil was saying there, well, it's not going to be like that. You're going to have these nanobots flowing through your blood, and you're going to be, have eternal youth. It's going to be that sort of immortality, not, just a grotesquerie of getting older and older and shriveling up like a lich, which brings us all the way back around to the lich and these idea of phylacteries, right? And so I'm calling this tonight, of course, Phylacteries of the Future, binding souls from magic to machines. And I think it fits. I think it fits into this context of at least not even metaphorically, I think directly, because you have this weirdness of trying to take consciousness and put it in a vessel. Okay, but the vessel need not be a willing vessel. It could be an object. It could be something like that Dybbuk box. And I'll reframe that real quick for the people that aren't aware of what that story looks like. But the Dybbuk box, of course, is a haunted object from Jewish folklore. I'm going to just read this so I don't mess it up. But it fits eerily well within the framework of these consciousness-bound vessels that we're exploring tonight. In legend, a Dybbuk is a restless spirit, often the soul of a deceased individual, unable to find peace and believed to possess the living or attach itself to objects. Okay? See what we're getting at here? The Dybbuk box is said to house such a spirit, containing it within a physical object, much like the cursed tablets or phylacteries we discussed earlier, as we're still discussing tonight. It represents a convergence of ritual, consciousness, and containment, an attempt to trap or bind a mind or fragment of soul, preventing it from wreaking havoc in the world. So the Dybbuk box is basically this exact thing, except it's a restless spirit. It's sometimes seeking vengeance, and the actual Dybbuk box itself, the modern one that's supposed to be that has respawned this idea of the Dybbuk box itself, an idea from the days of yore, is here in Vegas. It's over on East Charleston in the Zach Baggins Museum. It's there, the one that is supposedly haunted. That there's a whole show on it. When we're done here, I'll link that short show in the description if you want to hear a little bit more about that. It's a creepy tale. It's been, hauntings. It passed from owner to owner, and people were having horrific nightmares and even getting physically ill. And they were selling this thing to kind of keep these restless spirits at bay. And so I wonder, in the context of a spirit bound to an object in that capacity, like a Dybbuk box or the phylactery of the Lich, or even let's say a digital vessel in some capacity, like a jump drive, right? Or a hard drive, or, we talked about those Superman crystals. Maybe that's what this turns into, where you end up, Kal-El from, what is it? What's Superman's dad's name? Anybody remember that? Anyway, you get the idea. Okay. But still, I wonder if the spirit itself, the consciousness, would get restless and angry if it was trapped into an object like that. And maybe that's part of what the lashing out idea of a Dybbuk spirit is, or the rest of that stuff. But of course, it gets complicated, doesn't it? Because how would you do this? And Ray Kurzweil, again, I saw somebody post this about that exact thing he said about living forever and all the rest. And they said, I really hate this because I forgot who it was, or I'd sourced them properly, but I read this several days ago, so I just can't remember. Try scrolling on X and finding anything again. But they said, I really hate that Kurzweil said this because he's so smart. He's basically a genius. But the soul itself is, consciousness is not something that resides in your brain. You can't just scan the brain and upload your consciousness. That makes no damn sense, because consciousness permeates every single cell in our body. And it is the entirety of the human experience, not just, let's say, as we're born, but as we live and grow and change and all the rest of that. So when I read that, I was like, yeah, that seems really accurate to what I think about this stuff, and probably what many of you would agree with. But do you agree? I'm not going to speak for you. I'm just speaking for myself and kind of throwing ideas out, which is really what I do. But so those are the questions tonight. So these phylacteries of the future would be hard drives. They would be, servers, these massive servers where presumably you could put one consciousness into, and then you could store another one, and then suddenly you have this massive database of consciousness together. And it reminds me back to the phylactery and this weirdness of the Lich where we started, which we'll get back into because it's a pretty interesting thing. The undead living forever through sorcery. But it reminds me of Ghostbusters. You guys remember the old original OG Ghostbusters where they had the ghost traps, and they would, capture the ghosts. So they're these floating spirits and whatnot, angry spirits. And then they'd contain them in these little boxes, and then they put them in this larger containment unit together. Weird, right? So now you have all these angry spirits kind of hanging out in the same containment unit together. Again, philosophically, I know Ghostbusters is not real. You decide the levels of real here. By the way, all the disclaimers always apply. I'm just doing what I do, which is considering concepts and trying to mix old ideas and new ideas and see metaphor where maybe metaphor is being ignored when sometimes it's very obvious in the modern day. But look, I don't know. This one to me is really tough, and we've talked about this before, but it does seem like it is maybe the eternal quest or the end game quest of what humanity is meant to become. Okay. And I mean that from what are, the quote elites of the world, the people with all the resources. They seem to be chasing this very hard. Even what's that weird guy that his name's something or other, but he does the blood transfusions. He replaces his plasma. He's got the blood boy. Which is his son, by the way. And he calls his son his blood boy. Yeah. I'll try and find the guy's name. I can't remember. He's on X as well. But he's supposedly doing this stuff to keep himself sort of eternally young, which in that case, that sounds a lot like, right, old witchcraft or sorcery, or right, so some sort of evil way to do this back to Bathory and that whole, using the blood of young people to keep yourself young, or dare I say, that company Goop where they're grinding up the, discarded foreskins of, never mind, and then, putting that smear on their face. Whatever the hell's going on with that, it is just, it seems demonic, right? And again, this is from a guy that's, admittedly not very religious. I do enjoy the ideas, but it does seem like this is not the good kind of magic. But what would I know? I'm not a magician, and I am here just hanging out, talking about weird stuff by dark and night. But yeah, so the phylacteries and the Dybbuk, and just sort of capturing the essence or the soul of something into an object itself is ancient. It is one of those things that goes back, and there's a lot of examples here, which we'll get into tonight as part of the discussion. But that is the question. It is something that has not just been maybe something we've been chasing forever. Is it the pinnacle of what humans would aspire to be? Meaning that you could remove your actual consciousness and place it into some object. And whether that's going to be an ancient candelabra, as I said, or some Dybbuk box, or whatever, what have you, a pendant or a locket, all these things could be acceptable phylacteries in the sense of, housing a consciousness, at least in D&D rules. Like I said, I'll be the part-time dungeon master tonight because, like I said, I barely am the arbiter of my own truth, my own reality. So I'll, we'll do a little Marvel's What If meets Dungeons and Dragons tonight. But you get the idea. You think any of this stuff is real and possible, and it does seem like we are mirroring the concepts of the old ways with the new ways. In the new ways, it's a hard drive. The old ways, it was like a rocking chair. It was a phylactery of sorts. It was a candelabra, the coin, or whatever it was. I don't know. Does it seem like we're chasing down something that's quite a bit more evil than we could ever dream of here? And is the concept itself, well, quote unquote evil? It sure seems like that to me. But I guess maybe I'm a Luddite, and in 100 years we're all going to be laughing because we're all going to be knock on wood still alive. Who knows? Okay, so I'm not crapping on it entirely, but I am saying that there seem to be some parallels here to some evil wizards that would conjure through the darkest of magic a way to remain alive forever. Yeah, the downside, of course, is you lose your nice looking human form. Which is unfortunate, but lots of stuff to get into, of course. But there's other ways to consider this regarding consciousness and quantum immortality. There's lots of angles to get to tonight, which we will definitely. But as usual, I'd like to hear what you think about this, and that's exactly the point of this, is just to have a conversation, for me to rattle on a little bit, and for you guys to pop in here and save my ass night after night. I appreciate it. But what do you think? Is any of this stuff real at all? Do you think it's possible? And is it really kind of hearkening back to the idea of something like, ancient ritual evil magic? Does it feel that way? Do you think that there's a good way to do this? Because it seems to me like it's kind of chaotic evil. You know what I mean? Lawful evil. If you guys are into the those level of Dungeons and Dragons alignment charts or whatever, it certainly doesn't seem like this is something that would kind of happen out of a holy book. You see what I'm saying? More of an unholy book. But what do I know? Like I said, I'm just a part-time dungeon master in this capacity. But that's what's on my mind tonight. I hope you guys are all doing well, talking phylacteries of the future, and of course, digital consciousness. And Halloween, is everybody's jazzed for Halloween coming up a week from tonight. Everybody all decorated, who's got their costumes set up. Just love to hear whatever you're feeling. And do you think that a lich actually fits into this Halloween context? Because I certainly do. It seems like when it gets cold, remember how I said last week or whatever, you snapped your fingers, it went from like 95 degrees in Vegas to like 60. It's warmed up just a smidge since then, but definitely that sort of snap of the cold gives you that vibe that something wicked has rolled into town, right? Something wicked this way comes. Yeah, maybe not. As usual, you tell me. I don't have the answers. I just have the questions, and I'd love to hear what you think. One more time, 702-957-1037. That's 702-957-1037. You can click the Discord link at troubledminds.org. We'll put you on the show. We're talking phylacteries of the future. Binding souls from magic to machines. Is it possible to do this at all? And if we do, are we crossing the bridge between what is right and what is wrong? Tonight we're talking phylacteries of the future, binding souls from magic to machines. Now, it used to be a Dybbuk, right? A Dybbuk was that old demon in that story that's I'll show you this article here in a sec because I think it's pretty wild. But that idea, the phylactery, that of course has now become some new thing instead of the lich of the wizard of old keeping himself alive through sorcery and black magic. Instead, the phylactery has become a hard drive, and entities like, I said it, entities like Ray Kurzweil and Bob Bigelow and some of these billionaires out there are, well, they seem to be obsessed with keeping themselves up. and swearing is just around the corner. Now, Kurzweil's new thing, we talked about it when the paper just hit and he had released a book, but he says that by 2030, we'll all be immortal. I have my doubts. I just have my doubts. Do you guys have your doubts? Because I kind of have my doubts. And the other question is part of it. So when is that even possible? Is it possible to transfer consciousness to an object or a machine? Okay. Second, do you think it is sort of bridging the gap between where human evolution always wanted to go? Okay. Because imagine if we could achieve this, then this seems not just magical, it seems transcendent. And it could change everything forever. And is this where consciousness wants to go? Okay. And that's layer 2 of this. And the third question, of course, is this in the Dungeons and Dragons aspect in the, since we're doing a little bit of that tonight, is this more chaotic evil than it is neutral good, if you catch my meaning? Does it seem like you cross a line once this starts to happen? And I don't really know. Like I said, I'm not the arbiter of that truth, and surely not the arbiter of, esoteric ideas or of course how they impact the world today, but it sure seems to me like there is something happening with the convergence of this stuff, even with the Dybbuk and whatnot. So I'll get back to this story in a second, but it is incredibly wild, and I'll just read you the headline. But the modern resurrection of the Dybbuk, demon of Jewish folklore, how a superstition goes from the Talmud to TikTok. That needs to be a t-shirt.